Hello, Mishpacha. It's Courtney, America's Jewish mother, and it is September 1st, so I am now going to do my August reading wrap-up and rankings of the books that I read in the month of August. So I read 10 books in August, which again is not as many as I read in June, July, and May, summer months, when I was not teaching 4 classes. But again, since I'm now teaching 4 classes again and struggling to keep up, I feel like 10 books is pretty good. So anyway, when I also DNF'd a book, so that's going to be the one that's the last on my list. By the way, I don't know how y'all do this, but I don't actually count DNFs as books that I've read in the month. So even though I did read like 125 pages or whatever of Paris Trout, I don't count that in my books that I've read. But it is at the end of the ranking because it was, in fact, the book that I liked least, even though I didn't finish it. So anyway, so in last place is a book that I DNF'd, which is Paris Trout by Pete Dexter. This was the first in the Barter Hordes backlist book club, so probably you've already heard about it from more people aside from just me, and it basically revolves around the title character, Paris Trout, who in the opening part of the book kills this 14-year-old African-American girl in 1950s small town Georgia, and we basically just see how much of a psychopath he really is. So yeah, that's pretty much the premise of the book, and like I said, when I DNF'd it, I felt like the violence in this book was very gratuitous, and the sexual abuse I also found gratuitous, and so that's why I DNF'd it. So that was the book that I liked least this month. So now on to the books that I actually finished. So in last place, so number 10 is Swish by Joel Derfner. This is a collection of essays. By the way, this is subtitled My Quest to Become the Gayest Person Ever. So each of the essays is about sort of a single pursuit of the author's in his quest to become the gayest person ever. So there's a chapter on knitting, there's one on musical theater, there's one on the brief stint that he had as a go-go boy. So yeah, they're all about stuff like that, but also it's sort of an examination of how he, sort of came into his own identity and stuff like that. And I ended up giving this 2.5 stars because I found it committed a sin that I feel like a lot of memoirs commit, which is that it's too much navel gazing. There were 2 essays in here that I liked, and those were the essays where the author actually looked outside of himself. And I also just found him exhausting because he just angsts constantly about how other people think about him. And as I said when I wrapped this up, we're not thinking about you that much. So yeah, that was number 10. Number 9 was Iola, Leroy by Frances E.W. Harper. This I taught in my online course on the novel. It is an early one. It's not the earliest, but it's one of the earlier African-American novels. It was published in 1892, and it centers around this very light-skinned, well, she basically looks white. It centers around this white-looking woman named Iola Leroy who finds out that actually she has some African ancestry, and because of that she's then able to be disinherited and become enslaved. And so it follows her partially pre-Civil War and during the war, and then mostly it follows her after the war. And again, as I said when I wrapped this up, I think this is a book that one should read more for its historical merit than for the actual storyline, because most of the characters come across as very flat, and they pretty much serve as talking heads or mouthpieces for ideas that Frances E.W. Harper wants to get across. Now, I mean, that being said, she does cover quite a good bit in, the span of like 220 pages or something like that. So she covers, everything from miscegenation to disenfranchisement to mass incarceration to temperance, to women being employed outside the home, colorism. Anyway, there's a whole bunch of stuff that she covers. So yeah, I don't think it works as a novel by today's standards, but again, definitely a valuable look at the history of the African American novel. So yeah, that was 2.75 stars for me. Then in 8th place was The Big Jewish Book for Jews by Ellis, Weiner, and Barbara Davilman. And initially I gave this 3.25 stars, but then when I was like looking at my rankings at the end of the month, I decided to revise my initial ranking to 3 stars because I didn't think this was as good as the next book I'm going to talk about that I actually rated 3 stars. So I bumped this down to 3 stars. Do you guys do stuff like that, by the way? Do you like sort of assess your ratings at the end of the month? Let me know down in the comments. Anyway, this is part of my Light in August reading. It was just something that was, you know, light, humorous, not heavy at all. And it is kind of funny. But again, I think the humor relies in large part on cultural knowledge about Judaism and some stereotypes, which is why I gave it 3 stars. So that was number 8. Okay, coming in at number 7 is a book I do not have here with me because I read it as an ebook from the library, but that is Philip Roth's novel, The Human Stain. I also gave this 3 stars. I think it actually has a lot of interesting insights about human nature, but I did not like the way that the story unfolded. I thought it was just told in a, well, not confusing like Absalom kind of way, but it was told in a way that didn't necessarily make sense. And, you know, again, I sort of ranted about this in the Friday Reads video where I wrapped this up, but I just don't know why it was told linearly or non-linearly. So that didn't make a lot of sense to me. But yeah, this centers on an older college professor who has an affair with a woman who works as a cleaning woman at the school, who's much younger than he is, and this causes a scandal. And then he also does something at the beginning of the book that causes him to resign his post from the university in disgrace. And then it's about his, after his death, a friend of his sort of uncovering all these things about his life that no one ever knew. So that's The Human Stain by Philip Roth. That came in at number 7. At number 6 was Tippett by Maggie Griffin. I gave this 3.5 stars. Again, you kind of have to already know and appreciate Kathy Griffin's comedy to read this book and like it. Now, I already knew about Kathy Griffin. I already knew about Maggie Griffin. I knew what Tippett meant before I even read the book. And so I think for that reason, I liked this more than someone who does not already have any familiarity with Kathy Griffin or her now late mother, Maggie. But again, it was light. It was whimsical. It was occasionally poignant and charming. So I gave this 3.5 stars. Coming in at number 5 was Julie Schumacher's novel, The Shakespeare Requirement. This is technically a sequel to Dear Committee Members, but you can also read this as a standalone novel. Jason Fitger, who is his professor of creative writing at Payne University, which is somewhere in the Midwest, has to deal with all of this, all of these shenanigans from the economics department, and then he has to deal with all of these shenanigans from his colleagues. And meanwhile, he's, you know, kind of trying to get back with his ex-wife, and yeah, it's just, it was fun. It was fun, it was light. It didn't quite all come together in a way that I would have liked, but I did enjoy it, and I definitely would read another one by Schumacher, so I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. Coming in at number 4 was Faulkner's Absalom, and I wrapped this up in my last Friday Reads video, so I'm not going to say too much about it here. This centers around Thomas Sutpen. Well, it tells the story of Thomas Sutpen and his family and his sort of fall from grace. And it's told through a bunch of different characters, including Rosa Coldfield, who is his sister-in-law, and also Quentin Compson, whose grandfather, I think, was friends with Sutpen. And then it's sort of like a slow reveal. So again, it's also told non-linearly. By the way, brief spoiler alert here. So if you don't want to hear a spoiler about this book, skip ahead to when I'm holding up the next book. But I discovered when I was reading this that I think this is the book that's responsible for 2 tropes in contemporary fiction that I really hate, which are 1, telling a story non-linearly, and 2, incest. So, yeah, so I'm pretty sure this came from this book. Anyway, so I ended up giving this 3.5 stars. The writing is beautiful, but it was very challenging to get through. So, yeah, that's number 4. Coming in at number 3 was Bread Givers by Anzia Yezierska. This was also 3.5 stars for me. This book was originally published in 1925. It tells the semi-autobiographical story of the author, but the narrator of the book is Sarah Smolinski, who's the youngest daughter of Polish Jewish immigrants to the United States. Her family is very, very impoverished and lives on the Lower East Side. And her mother, and she and her three sisters, there are four of them in all, have to work to financially support their father, who's this religious scholar of Jewish law. And it's basically sort of about the conflict between traditional Judaism and old world values and the patriarchy versus American values and independence and individualism and, to a certain extent, feminism, but I would even more so say egalitarianism here. But yeah, I like this. I found it compelling. It was a pretty fast read because it's pretty plot heavy. But yeah, so I give this 3.5 stars. That was my number 3 read of the month. Coming out at number 2, I don't have this book here with me, because I also read it as an ebook from the library, but this is Brit Bennett's The Vanishing Half, which just came out a couple of months ago, and again, this one's been all over BookTube, so I'm not going to say too much about it, except that it basically explores the theme of racial passing using these two very light-skinned African-American sisters, and their lives take divergent paths. So Desiree marries a dark-skinned African-American man and has a daughter who's also very dark-skinned. Meanwhile, her twin sister Stella decides to pass as white, and basically leaves the family behind. And so you follow both sisters and you follow their daughters, and you see where their lives intersect again. And it's really an exploration of how we construct identity and why we make the choices that we do and whether those choices are ultimately worth it. And I think what I liked about this book is it has positive portrayals of identity formation and negative portrayals of identity formation. So yeah, and I found it a compelling read, so I ended up giving that one 3.5 stars. Sorry, not 3.5, 3.75 stars. And then my best read of the month was Evie Shockley's collection of poetry, Semiautomatic, which I gave 4 stars. I read Evie Shockley's The New Black last year, and it was my favorite poetry collection of 2019. And this is similar to The New Black in the sense that it's very experimental in terms of structure and form. None of the poems in this collection are the same structurally or formally speaking, and I quite liked that because it kept things interesting. Mostly this poetry collection focuses on violence against people of color. Although there are some other things in here that I'm not quite sure how they fit into that larger theme. Like there's a whole section called the Topsy Suite, which kind of reimagines Harriet Beecher Stowe's character Topsy from Uncle Tom's Cabin. And then there's also a poem called Du Bois in Ghana, which talks about how when he was over age 90, W.B. Du Bois moved to Ghana and lived out the rest of his days there. And again, I wasn't totally sure how that tied back into the theme of violence against people of color, but again, I love the poems. I thought a lot of them were really sharp and incisive. Shockley does a great job of blending experimental poetry with the experiences of people of color, especially African Americans in the United States. And yeah, so like I said, even though this collection didn't quite come together thematically for me in the same way that The New Black did, I still felt like it was a very strong collection and I really enjoyed it, so I gave this 4 stars, and that was my best read of the month. So yeah, so that is my wrap up and rankings for the month of August. I would love to hear your thoughts on any of these books down in the comments below. I would also love to know what your favorite book in the month of August was, so you can let me know that too if you would like. So yeah, thank you for watching. I hope you're all doing well and staying healthy, and I hope you're doing good reading. And until next time, would it kill you to call you mother?